welcome to the Space Coast Writers Guild, Brevard Authors Society, Novus Annos Short Story Competition Award Ceremony. We've been working on this since January, and boy are we glad today is finally here. So, the first person I want to thank is in the back of the room. Jean Blahovic is the founder of the Brevard Authors Society. Without Jean to help with from beginning to end, over the submission guidelines, over the Excel sheet, and how to determine the rubrics, and reading the stories, and helping me with the numbers, and setting up today, and creating the programs. You know, you can't do it alone. Everything you do it with a team, and that's what I like. And thank you, Jean. I have his wife in my notes. She's not here today. She's ill. Ordinarily, she would be. She'd be over here setting this up, and so make sure that you thank her too, because behind every helpful man is a wonderful woman. So I thank her because I was on the phone with him countless times, and she's always been gracious about sharing his time with me over this. So. We received over 70, we had 71 submissions. More than half were in the top 20. So the competition was really, really tough. No two stories told a similar tale. Next, I'd like to thank 16 people who were the judges. This was not an easy task. Every story went through a screening stage and was judged based on a set of rubrics derived from a culmination of those used by the Writers Digest, the Florida Writers Association, and the Florida Institute of Technology, all of whom host their own short story contests. So we took those rubrics, kind of put them in a bag, shook them up, and pulled some out. So if you don't understand what rubrics are, they are a means of communicating expectations for an assignment, providing focused feedback on works in progress, and grading final products. The judges scored each of the following elements on a scale of 1 through 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being highest scored. It did not matter whether the judge actually liked the story. Each story could be judged only on the following. Hook. The opening paragraphs compel the reader to keep reading. Structure. Grammar, spelling, format, and mechanics do not distract or interrupt the flow. The characters had to be believable. The dialogue and actions needed to be consistent with each of the main characters. Plot. The main events are interrelated. It employs effective use of the 3-act, beginning, middle, and end, where it comes to a resolution. The action, events, conflicts, and turning points propel the story forward. And lastly is the quality of the narrative. All the story elements work together to create unity, credibility, and insight. So this was a serious undertaking that each of these 16 judges volunteered to take on. And nobody got anything back to me overnight. As a matter of fact, I got 3 in like the last day. So I was sweating it while I was waiting. Okay. Thank you for that reminder. Everyone else, please make sure their phones are off. But look at mine isn't off either. Wow.
Mine's an airplane phone.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank all the 71 people who submitted. I know some of you are here today. I mean it. There were so many good stories. They all jumped around, and you know, without the submissions, we wouldn't have had a contest. So there's people who are putting your stuff out there, and as writers, that's a hard thing to do, is to put yourself out there. So I'm proud of you, and I'm very grateful. So what happened was that all 71 submissions went through an initial screening phase. And these 16 judges, okay, 12 judges, the stories were split up and went to 3 judges apiece. And so all of these 12 judges read 3 stories. And after they were all read and the numbers were calculated, then we were going to have 10 go on to the finalists. But because we had so many grouped that were good, we sent 15 to the final judges. 4 judges used the same set of rubrics that I've just told you to do the final judging. We thought we were going to have 5 winners. We actually have 6 because somewhere in there we had a tie. That didn't surprise me because, like I said, the numbers were so close. All right, congratulations, finalists. You're here because you're riding. I know you're dying to know who won. But first, I want to introduce our keynote speaker. Author of more than 14 novels, Faye Lamb writes emotionally charged stories for the Romans 8:28 attitude, reminding readers that God is always in the details. She donates 100% of her royalties to Christian charities. She currently works as an editor for Pelican Book Group and its 3 imprints, White Rose Publishing, Harbor Light Books, and Watershed Books. She also teaches workshops at events such as the Central Florida chapter of American Christian Fiction Writers. I really had to oil up my tongue this morning. And the Christian Authors Guild Catch the Wave Conference near Atlanta, Georgia. You can find Faye on her personal Facebook page, Facebook author page, the Tactical Editor on Facebook, and on Goodreads. She's also active on Twitter, writes blogs called On the Ledge, Inner Source, and the Tactical Editor, Faye Lamb.
Good morning. Happy Saturday and happy Memorial Day weekend. I'd like to thank, first of all, the Space Coast Writers Guild and the Brevard Authors Society for inviting me here today. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I want to congratulate each of you. This celebration is not only for the winners of the short story contest, it's also for those of you who submitted your work. My husband often says of me, and it's true of you, you put yourself out there. Cindy said it. You put yourself out there. As writers, if we plan to move toward publication, we make ourselves vulnerable when we submit to somebody, like you send your work out, you give it to them, and they look at it. And some of them are going to love what you create. Others are not even going to give it at all. And those are just your friends and family. 100 times the tension is notched up when you decide, okay, I'm going to step out and I'm going to send my work to an agent or an editor or even an author whom you're going to expect will tell you the truth about your work. So today, I want to remind each of you to hold on to this one truth. You are all winners in this life's pursuit where the rules are very unclear, and those rules are defined by the person who may have your work at that moment. And those undefined rules are very, very aggravating, creating emotions in us that aren't always the best. You are winners in this game because you have done something that most people only talk about, but have never done. How often have you heard someone say, I think I'll write a story? As if it's a simple, simple task. But you who have undergone the learning, the studying of story elements, you know that it is a daunting thing to do, to sit down and write pen to paper or fingers to keyboard. For me, the task of learning to write so that I would have my work validated took 35 years. I never saw myself as a winner through that time. Desperate, crazy, stupid even for trying. That's how I saw myself. That's how I kept myself going, though. I forged onward, writing, 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 always writing. I searched for ways to learn the craft. I joined writers' groups, endured brutal critique, and I even cried at the comments that I received from contest entries that I had submitted. For me, the task of learning to write so that I could validate my work ended when I became, what I say, a semi-finalist in a writing contest. I was still desperate, I was still crazy, and I was still even stupid for trying. But light shone into the long, dark tunnel. I didn't win the award, but the adrenaline surge that I received kept me plodding onward toward the prize, which was a publishing contract, which I didn't receive as a result of that award. What I did receive was that validation that I had searched for so long. All the while, I continued to write and to write and to write. And I wanted to tell you today that yes, it is rewarding when you receive a contract from a publisher. And it's rewarding when you've self-published a book that you know that you've studied the craft and it's a well-written book. It's very rewarding. Remember, I said that I'd been writing for 35 years before I received my validation. My first attempt at writing began when I was 15. I would sit, a lonely teenager, in my room, and I would write every night, handwrite, sometimes 50 pages a night. I created stories that would be changed, or they would morph into something else, or they would just be lost. Then I got into journaling, and what I began to do is I journaled in a book, and I wrote vignettes. Somewhere along the line, I realized that I could take those vignettes, because they were about the same people in the same little town, and those vignettes were connected together. And I began to write a novel. I began to study as I wrote. I began to learn and then to grow with my writing and my characters. I went through exasperating times. I went through spot-on critique that really drove me to my knees. I really struggled with the art. Still, I pressed on for a total of 42 long years with this one story, while I wrote other stories. This year, that novel, Storms in Serenity, was released. But stop right now. I want you to stop right now. I want you to realize that whether you are published or unpublished, if you are honing your craft, if you are writing and continuing to write, jot these words down. I am a master storyteller in this writing life. I want to say that again. I don't see too many of you writing, but that's okay. I can repeat it after we get done. I am, are we ready? 1, 2, 3, here we go. I am a master storyteller in this writing life. I'm going to repeat it one more time because y'all were doing so well, but I want to hear everybody repeat after me. I am a master storyteller in this writing life. Create a meme. If you know what a meme is, you're ahead of the game. Create a meme or a poster. Make it a desktop pic on your computer. Hang it in your room, in your office, or print it on a card and take it with you everywhere you go. When you doubt, look at those words and realize that one day you said, I think I'll write a story, and you followed through. I'm not a statistician, and no, you can't take this to the bank, but I'm going to say that in Fay Lamb's make-believe mathematical knowledge, that 90% of the people that have said, I think I'll write a story, are losers in this game because they have never followed through. Publication is a benchmark, yes, but so is picking up the pen or clicking on the keyboard. If you have done so, You are a master storyteller and a winner in this writing life. Once you start writing, though, you will most likely come to another important benchmark. You're going to decide that you have to deal with these awful people in the writing industry. Dealing with those people in charge can be a nightmare. I know this because I'm not only dealing with the boogeyman, I'm one of them. Today, though, I'm standing alongside you, and I want to tell you my story. And I don't know, and I would love to hear from you. Maybe you have a worse one than I do, but I haven't heard it yet. I went to a writer's conference, and imagine yourself putting yourself out there and handing your work to an agent, and he looks at you, and he said, "There's something about your writing, I don't know what it is, but I don't like it." Funny how I remember, those are the exact words he said to me, and I remember them today. This was many years ago. Why do I remember them? Because I'd worked hard for 15 years at that time. I was honing my craft. I went there. This was my third writer's conference. This was the first one where I felt that I was confident enough that I could emotionally handle the criticism. So what do you do with those words? What he did, if he had said, "There's something about your writing I don't like, and this is what it is," I would have been critically wounded. But what he did was nearly fatal to me, and I'm not kidding. My writer's heart was stabbed. Here I was, 30 years old, writing since I was 15, and certain I knew what I was doing. At that point, all I could think about was giving up on my writing. But those who are born with a heart filled with imagination cannot give up. I was emotionally and physically waging a war against myself because my self-esteem had been shot down, and I was fighting against my writer's nature. I ended up in bed on my back, and I declare it was a result of that man's word. For 4 months, I was ill. At that time, I hadn't been a semifinalist. I hadn't had a publishing contract. But I am a master storyteller and a winner in this writing life. I finally got back up. I worked harder at learning the craft. I wrote, I studied, and I wrote. And as I renewed my writing, my strength returned, and I learned something. Remember, I said I was a semifinalist in this award. As a result of that, I got to attend a conference. And guess who was on faculty and accepting manuscripts at that conference? Yep, my favorite agent. The one of whom my friend joked about when she called me one day in the midst of my war with myself, and she said, "I'm going on a writer's conference." She was a real encouraging girl. She goes, I'm going on a writing conference cruise. I'd invite you to come along, but you know who is going, and I think you'll throw them overboard. Without even thinking, and this is not my nature either, I said, yes, I would. But after that phone call, that's when I learned something about my writing that the agent never grasped. I needed to talk to him, but that was going to take a miracle. I laid out some fleece. And that's what Christians do when we know that God wants us to do something, but we don't want to do it. So we kind of challenge God to make it happen. For months before that conference, I prayed, "Lord, if you want me to talk to him, you're going to have to bring him to me." So I pull up to this fancy schmancy hotel before the conference began, and I'm handing my keys to the valet. And my friend who called me during my war with myself, she ran up to me and she whispers in my ear and she says, "Remember to tip the valet." You see, my friend was from Chicago and she visited me here in Florida. And valets are not common in Titusville, Florida. But then she hugged me tight and she said, "So-and-so is pulling in behind you." I turned, and getting out of his car was my favorite agent in the entire universe. So what do? I said, "Lord, I know, I just need another sign though." my friend had already registered for her room, and you can imagine her bebopping around. People are coming through the door. It's a big hotel. She's running to all of her writing friends. And I stood in line for the registration desk, minding my business because I didn't want to look around because God knew who I was trying to avoid. So my friend finally jogged back to me, and she put her arms around me again. And I have to tell you, at this time, she had no clue that I was dealing with God about this matter. And she leans and she goes, "He's behind you." I rolled my eyes toward heaven, and I said, "Lord, I need you to be clearer." No lightning bolt fell from the Indianapolis skyline through the 21-story building and into the lobby to land on my head, so I registered, and I hadn't even gotten to my room when my mentor, a wonderful author named Margaret Daly, who at that time had written over 100 novels, walked up to me and she said, "I want to take you to lunch." Yes! Anything to get me out of the way of God making me do what I wanted to do. So we strolled across the street to a restaurant, and I found myself stupidly pouring out my agent story. Margaret leaned back and she smiled and she said, "He's my agent. You need to talk to him. He's doing an agent panel tonight. I want you to go to that panel, and I want you to talk to him." So at that point, I figured Margaret and God had never steered me wrong. So I went to the agent panel. I sat through the entire thing, and I waited until everyone, and I do mean everyone, had left the room. I had something to tell this man, and I, at that point, was ready to tell him. I walked up to him, and I said, "You probably don't remember me, but..." And I'm telling you, I remember as clear as that day. He stepped back from me and he said, "Oh no, what did I tell you?" I repeated what he said word for word because it should be clear by now. I'd never forgotten those words. And he started to speak, but I waved my hand and I stopped him and I said, "Thank you. This is what I learned. You are absolutely correct. There was something about my writing that no one should have liked. And if I hadn't wasted my time feeling sorry for myself, because you were honest with me, I would be further along this road than I am. But I figured it out, and I'm a semifinalist." He stood there for a very long moment, and he finally said, "You know, I once told Ted Decker not to quit his day job. So what do I know?" If you don't know who Ted Decker is, you need to look him up. He quit his day job, very seriously. If you haven't gotten the moral of the story, there's 3 of them. The boogeymen are not always nice in their criticism. They may even be vague, but they have an insight that you, sitting on the outside, do not have. They know the craft. They know what sells. They know if your story has what it takes to make it in the market. What they say may sting like the dickens, but pull out that stinger and look at what hurts and see if they're correct. Number 2, don't let the boogeymen win. Even if they're right about your writing, they've given you something to work toward and to change. Get busy. And 3, they may also be very, very wrong. The publishing company where I work on staff as an editor offered me advice for my first published novel and asked me to resubmit. I tried like crazy to make those recommendations work, but they would not fit my novel because of the characters. So I set the novel aside, and I was attending a conference as a faculty member, and I sat down with another editor-in-chief of another company, and I just mentioned my novel. She said, "Send it to me." It wasn't a week later, I had a contract, not only for that one novel, but the entire series. The next week, I had a contract for a second series, and I'm working on my 3rd series. Because remember I said, I wrote, I was ready. I was ready. So don't be, let me go back, trust me. Even though we're boogeymen, we have good intentions. But our subjective reasoning sometimes might not be the reasoning you need. Don't be discouraged by a rejection. There's a lot of reasons for a rejection. Sometimes it's not even how you write or the nature of your story. It's just that it doesn't fit that publisher. Think of it as a challenge. It's another benchmark on your journey. My road data is that 90% of the 90% of people who pick up a pen or clink on the keyboard never submit what they've written. And if you are one of those who have, you are plagued often with aggravation of being a writer. With aggravation comes envy, self-doubt, and total frustration that others who seem to work less, but probably are working just as hard, have already made it before you have, or are writing better than we are, or are being published more than we are. Rejection brings about these feelings. Time spent alone with our imaginary characters and our imaginary worlds bring those feelings about. Authors in their own worlds, with their own little created beings, often become the center of their own universe. If you go on Facebook, it seems to be that it's a crisis line for authors who are begging for people to say that they should keep going, that they're better than any other author, or that their turn will come. The crisis hotline consists of two sets of volunteers trying to talk the writer off the storytelling ledge. One group shouts out, "Don't give up! That writer isn't as good as you are. You should never doubt your abilities." The other group is not so enabling. They're trying to push out the competition. You should give it up if you have that much doubt. And if you have time to compare yourself to other writers, then you're not writing, you don't have time for writing. And if you're not writing, then maybe you aren't meant to be a writer. I'm kidding about pushing out the competition, because really, that last group are just tough love people. I truly have never met an author in this business that does not, in his or her heart of hearts, champion other writers. We may approach them differently as volunteers in the crisis line for storytelling suicide, but the simple truth is that all writers, at one time or another, maybe 100 times over, want to give up. In this business, the abnormal author is the one who never doubts or never wants to give up. But in a normal writer's next breath, they are in love with words and with story structure. All is right with the world. So, when you're feeling that you want to lay down your writer's pen, do it. Get up, walk away, go have a piece of cake. If you're into something healthier, eat something healthy for you. By the time you get back to your desk, you're going to forget that you ever gave up the writing life. Then there comes in the envy. Envy is normal in our business. But if you let it grow, that's where you can be stunted as a writer. You get your eyes set on other authors and what they're doing. So if it goes unchecked, you're in trouble. You need to pull it out by the roots. We do that when we champion each other. And thus the reason I see so much compassion and so much working together in the writing community. We are all pulling up bitter roots and replacing them with vines of compassion and encouragement. This is a must. It takes us out of the center of our universes and places us in reality and in connection with people who care. And comparing yourself to others, that's a dangerous game, especially in the world that I told you is very, very subjective. I have a friend who writes simplistic little stories, and her heroes and her heroines are nothing but complex. One of them, her heroine has lost a leg. Her hero is overweight and bordering on diabetes. I would have never dreamed up those characters. So why should I be worried about the audience that she's gathered? I should be gathering my own audience to the creations that I make. And if I'm encouraging her, then our audiences may cross, and they have. So today, some of you will receive rewards for the stories that you presented for judging. More of you will not. Yes, the winners are to be congratulated. But when you clap today, I want you to envision yourself coming together in dual applause. One for the award winner, and the other for yourself and the others in this room who put themselves out there. You are all master storytellers and winners in this writing life. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. I've always enjoyed listening to you. Have just a little gift for you.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. The moment we've all been waiting for. Well, here to introduce the authors and their winning titles is Jim Nelson, James R. Nelson. Hi, Jim, there you are.
Jimmy.
Okay, he is the author of 10 mystery novels and one soon to be finished, correct? Raised in Michigan's remote Upper Peninsula, he says the solitude of living in the woods helped him develop a love of reading and an interest in authors and writing. He graduated from Western Michigan University with a Bachelor of Science degree and then went on to obtain a master's degree in education. He's a director of the Boulevard Authors Society and a member of the Space Coast Writers Guild, 2 writing groups, and teaches a class, How to Write Your First Novel. Next month at the Space Coast Writers Guild meeting, he's teaching us a Marshall Plan, how to outline your novel. Jim? So here's how this is going to work. As each winner's name is called, starting from 5th place, come up, receive your award. And I have your excerpts up here if you didn't bring them, okay? Because after you receive your award, get your photo taken, then I'll ask if you will please read your excerpt and let me know if you need it, and then I'll hand it to you. For those winners who preferred it, a reader has been assigned. Okay?
All right, what I have here is a hermetically sealed bag from Price Waterhouse. My name's Steve Harvey. What could go wrong? Actually, not this right. So we will start with our 5th place winner for her short story called Finger Paint, Linda Zern.
Oh, yes, I can. So I told Cindy I don't write kittens. I write about hard things. So you keep the kids in the house when those boys get here. You hear me? Daddy did not look up from his dinner. He scooped mashed potatoes into his mouth without stopping until Leah could see flowers in the middle of the plastic plate. Daisies grew under his mashed potatoes. Leah pushed her potatoes and lima beans to the edge of her own plate so that it would bloom daisies too. Why do those people have to come here? Mommy said, stabbing a lima bean through the heart. Right here to our neighborhood. I've got business to do, my own business, Doris. Daddy was home early for making the moon rockets for the astronauts to do his business, his own. Billy started to smash his lima beans into mush that looked just like his mashed potatoes. Mommy and Daddy ignored him. Leah could feel the fight coming. It was the way Mommy made her lips skinny and in the way Daddy said Mommy's name. Leah's stomach cramped. I just don't want... Mommy hesitated, glancing at Billy, who was busy trying to push his butter knife into the bottom of his glass. She leaned forward and whispered, that kind, in here, in our house, our new house. She waved one hand at the empty walls and the bare terrazzo floor. Just keep the kids in the house. I'll keep those boys outside. The doorbell buzzed, and Mommy's hand fluttered to her nose and then to her mouth like a butterfly trying to decide which flower petal to balance on. Billy jumped down and jetted for the front door, skidding in his socks across the floor. It was his favorite game on the slick terrazzo. Daddy was out of his seat so fast that his chair squealed backwards and crashed down. He caught Billy just as his brother's hands twisted the front doorknob. You asked to be excused? Daddy dragged at the neck of his brother's red t-shirt, pulling him off of his feet. Sit down. The shirt gaped open over one bony shoulder. Billy pouted his way back to the dinner table like a bad puppy. Mommy slapped Billy's hand away when he reached for his butter knife. Stop playing around and eat, both of you. When Billy and Mommy wrestled over silverware, Daddy escaped through the front door. The door slammed shut.
Let me interrupt just for 1 minute. I want to tell you all too, these are only excerpts that you're hearing. The stories will be, with everyone's permission, we'll talk to you about that later. They'll be published on the Space Coast Writers Guild site, the whole story, and on the Brevard Authors Society site.
Cindy.
Yep.
That's all I got. That's all. Okay. All right, here we go. For the short story, More Than She Expected, Valerie Buchanan.
Hi. The Estate of Joseph Edward Love III, Bess read aloud. Another day's newspaper was sprawled over the covers as she leaned against the headboard. She took a sip of tea and put it down, already tired of it. Grapevines from eclectic to unusual, starts 8:30 a.m. It was exactly what she needed. A diversion from the constant tossing and turning and swollen eyes that had run out of tears. Grief did not bring her George back. Had it been 8 months already? Had she been sitting in a lonely house, moping about, staring at the walls in baggy sweats, eating ramen all this time? George would have had her head if he knew she'd fallen into this sad state of affairs. The challenge of perusing an estate sale, looking for a great find, might jumpstart her back into the living. Enough, she said, and whipped off the covers, opened the curtains, and blew a kiss to the urn on the nightstand before clicking off the light. The Georgian manor was mobbed with bargain hunters when she arrived. She walked up the long driveway, breathing in the fresh spring air that poured from the trees and the dew-filled grass. In the large picture window, she spotted a reflection of a woman she almost didn't recognize, who had changed out her pink bedroom slippers to the foreign tightness loafers, wrapped in a chic cloak, gray hair lacquered into place. When she entered the house, she rubbed her arms that had been warmed by the sun a moment ago and pulled her cloak tight across her thin frame. She adjusted her eyes to the dim room. Her keen antiquing eye wandered across the foyer, and she could tell poor Mr. Love's belongings ended up in the hands of a bad curator. It was chaos, with massive piles of unorganized books, boxes spilling contents, and knickknacks strewn everywhere. She could barely spot a price tag, and the place was as disheveled as her hair had been earlier that morning. Her heartbeat thudded in her chest, and her lips sprang up at the corners of her mouth. It was a treasure hunter's playroom. Thank you.
We had a minor mix-up. And so we're going to, just between these two people, we're going to have to just clarify it, and I don't have the numbers here with me. Actually, on my list, Susan was in 4th place and Valerie was in 3rd. Unfortunately, the plaques have been made wrong, and so in order to make sure that my numbers are right, we're going to keep those 2 places question. And if you're in third place, then you will be sent the check. If you're in third place, then you will be sent the check. I apologize. We're human. Thank you for your patience and understanding. So Susan, stepping in your shoes here, if you will, please come up and I'm going to take your plaque back because it may not be correct.
I screwed up again.
So do you need your, well, I'd like to have you at least hold it anyway. Anything more than
Oh, man. Wait a minute, one more. Very good. Thank you.
The Christmas surprise. Sitting on the front porch steps, I am mesmerized by the tree on the other side of the dirt lane that ends here. The sun sparkles on its autumn plumage of yellow and orange leaves rippling in the light breeze. A meadowlark sits on the fence post. His head rises and his chest puffs out each time he flings his melody into the universe. His brilliant yellow breast and black vest are clearly visible. For this moment, all is at peace. I have stayed here too long. The darkness that exists inside this house is subtle and pervasive. My mother-in-law wants me to call her mother or mom, but I can't. I choke on the words. The best I can do is Miss M, which is short for Amelia, her first name. Mostly, though, I call her ma'am. It's hard to call someone mother who seems to enjoy picking on you. At first, I tried to please her, but it became apparent that was never going to happen. I'm tired of taking out the trash to the shed or sitting in the bathroom to hide my tears. Most days, I cook supper, and every evening, I clean up the kitchen. That's not enough, or perhaps it's too much. Maybe she thinks I'm trying to show her up. I don't know. I just know I have to get out. I wince thinking of some of her comments. Why my Billy married you is beyond me. You must be good in bed because you sure ain't nothing to look at. This supposed to be supper? Guess it's better than starving. Too bad your ma didn't teach you to cook, but at least you ain't lazy. Billy, my husband, is the apple who fell close to the tree. Mother and son thrive on yelling verbal abuses to each other. When they tire of that, they turn on me, trying to outdo each other with cruel taunts. Billy beat me last winter during a real snowy spell when everyone was housebound. He ran out of beer. It was my fault for not anticipating this and stocking up in advance. Miss M disappeared at the first blow. Later, he apologized, but I knew he was capable of seriously injuring me. I wonder what his father was like. He died when Billy was 14. Are they angry at him for leaving them to fend for themselves?
take these two and just verify these numbers and then have them do that. All right, please don't. I need to have a mix-up.
All right. Our next award winner for the short story Final Respects, Peggy
Thank you.
Sarah threw a handful of dirt onto the plain wooden box, heads down, hands in coat pockets. A sparse gathering of mourners, better described as obligated attendees, shifted from foot to foot and hovered around the open grave in the weak light of late afternoon. Otherwise, the chilly, drab cemetery on a remote hillside and surrounded on 3 sides by sighing pine forest, lay deserted by living souls. Weeds and uncut grass shivered on forgotten graves and around the aged tombstones, now leaning, crumbling at their edges, and wearing rust-colored water streaks. Gray-green moss dotted the monuments as if sponge painted here and there. One by one, attendees paid their respects to Sarah and escaped to cars lining the narrow dirt road at the base of the cemetery's sloping hill. They didn't look back. At last, Sarah stood alone at the edge of the grave in the moaning wind. She stared into the gaping wound in the earth and breathed in the pine-scented air that was tainted by a pungent essence of dirt and decay. She did not cry. The flimsy wood of the box was all that separated Sarah from the corpse, who by his own request was interred with neither coffin nor embalming. Sarah snorted. Maybe his only virtue had been a hazy sense of respect for the environment. Or was he just a cheapskate, even when it came to his own final resting arrangements? She kicked a little sandy soil into the grave. At least his wooden crate gave her the opportunity she needed. She took off her coat and draped it over a nearby tombstone. She surveyed the road and the empty cemetery to assure that she was alone with the dead. Pine boughs nodded and swayed. The gusty wind still complained. Grass and weeds met with sputtering gasps of cold air. Clouds passed in fits and starts in front of the setting sun and cast fleeting shadows across the open pit. But apart from vague animal stirrings in the forest, no other living being was evident in this forlorn, forsaken sight.
All right. Accepted prize winner. For the short story, Frozen Courage, Stephen Childs.
All right, Frozen Courage. I found out the hard way it was cold enough to become a permanent fixture of a corner street sign. As I stood there, the sensation in my right hand became a distant memory. I watched my former friends have a snowball fight. I say former because I refuse to play with them again after what they did to me. I would cry right now, but my dad says only sissies cry, and I'm no sissy, whatever that is. I just know I'm not one. My dad said sissies cry and act like little girls who come from New York and California, and I'm a 10-year-old boy from Mississippi, so I can't be a sissy. I wish I was, because now I can't feel my hand, and maybe if I cried, they would help free me. Robbie, I shouted at the group of boys in a pile in the slushy street. Help me get my hand free. I can't feel it no more. Robbie, Frank, Billy, and Craig looked at me as if they had forgotten I was stuck to the street sign. These Northerners are stupid. It hadn't been 10 minutes since they told me to stick my wet hand to the pole. They wanted to see what would happen, they said, and I think they already knew. When they all started laughing, I realized I was right. Robbie laughed so hard, snot shot out and dripped down his face. Smiling, he licked his lips. I'll help you, country boy, Robbie said as he struggled to his feet, with Frank and Billy trying to tackle him and drag him down to the slush. Leave him, shouted Billy. Let his hand freeze off, said Craig, as he picked up a handful of slush and let it loose at my head. It hit me square in my eye, and I saw stars. My eye was now as frozen as my hand. I won't cry, I won't cry. Step off, Craig, I got this. Robbie stared down at Craig, who looked away after a few seconds. Craig was strong and looked older than all of us, but everyone was a bit scared of Robbie since he had set an alley cat on fire. If he could do that to a cat, what else was he capable of? Thank you.
And finally, for our first place award winner, is there anyone in here that's a Florida toboggan, and we'll explain it to you. All right, Stephanie Passero.
Yes.
I'm going to read it for you.
Yeah, read it for me, thank you. I have a bum shoulder, I had surgery at the end of the month, and I want to pay men. So, please have somebody read it, because I don't know. I mean, it's like, on. I feel like Sally Field.
The toboggan. In the early morning, as the earth transitions from night to day, the temperature dips, the wind shifts, and the oppressive stillness of a winter night dissipates. Grace stepped onto the back deck overlooking the frozen trout pond, hot tea in hand. It was early. Her lungs welcomed the sharp, clean February air. Her cheeks stung from its slap, and she wiped her runny nose on the sleeve of her down parka. Shivering, she sipped her tea. The warm mug eased the morning stiffness in her arthritic fingers. This morning, it felt good to be alive. They'd had a good night, she and Carl. A good night together as husband and wife beneath the quilt she made years ago for their 25th wedding anniversary. The flannel sheets, soft and warm, cuddled their skin. A good night, a tender night, a night shared rather than taken. Their familiar morning routine was simple and comfortable. Grace was an early riser, Carl was not. She would sip a quiet cup of tea before putting on Carl's coffee and starting breakfast. Carl would smell the coffee, make a trip to the bathroom, and head downstairs. His feet heavy on the pine stairs announced his arrival, all grumpy and scruffy. He'd fix his coffee, give Grace a peck on the cheek, and grunt, "Morning, hon," before seating himself for breakfast. Oatmeal, every weekday morning the same. Eggs and bacon only on the weekends. But last night made this morning exceptional, not routine. Something deep within Grace had shifted. Everything was the same, but different. Her view had expanded. Everything had heightened dimension and depth. This morning she was happy and serene. Grace fixed Carl's coffee just the way he liked it and quietly headed upstairs. He was still in bed, feigning sleep, but she knew better. When she placed the steaming mug on the nightstand, he took her wrist and pulled her to him. His eyes were barely open, foggy from sleep and intimacy. He forced them to widen, focused on her, and grinned. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband." "You're beautiful, you know." "Carl, you're so full of it." "I'm full of love for you. Come here." He pulled her closer and kissed her so deeply, her eyes squeezed shut and tears escaped from the outer corners. After all these years, he still took her breath away. "I love you too." They held each other, resting in the satisfying stillness of a long-time married couple. Grace pressed her ear to Carl's chest, listening to its reassuring rhythm, every beat a gift. She kissed her fingertip and traced the bumpy surgical scar running down the center of his chest, a permanent reminder of how blessed they were to have been granted more time together. "Thanks for the coffee." "You're welcome." "Thanks for last night." "And this morning," she purred. "Are you complaining?" "Are you?" Carl stroked her arm and then her breast. "How about some breakfast? I'll cook." "You'll cook?" "Yep, a real He-Man breakfast." "Fine by me," she said, "but who's the He-Man?" They gorged on scratch buttermilk pancakes smothered in butter and local maple syrup with real pork sausage. After his second helping, Carl reached across the table and took Grace's hand. He rubbed her palm with his thumb and looked directly at her. He kissed her palm and then her wrist. "How would you like to play hooky today?" "Hooky?" "Hooky. Let's go into town. You can stop by the little shops you like, and I can pick up some things at Jake's Hardware. We can meet for lunch." "Lunch? Look at the time. It's almost noon, and I have a ton of laundry to do." "How's this? We split up to run errands, meet at the bookstore for some browsing, and have an early supper at Joyce's Diner. Grace raised an eyebrow. He was asking her to go against her practical, responsible side. He was offering to spend the day together, but is that what she wanted? It was a foolishly wonderful offer. He looked up at her with those wicked little boy eyes and grinned. Can't the laundry wait until tomorrow? How could she resist? She couldn't, and nodded yes. Then added a caveat, fine, but don't complain to me if you run out of underwear. He was beaming. She was grateful for his invitation, but refused to give him the satisfaction of showing it. I'll just have to go commando, like a true He-Man. In this weather, good luck. Let's get the kitchen straightened up and get this show on the road before you change your mind and find something else to feel guilty about. She whacked him on the arm, and their laughter came easily, naturally, like icicles melting and dropping from the eaves during a winter thaw. Their afternoon was easy, relaxed. Grace bought yarn to knit a baby blanket for the Wilsons down the road. Carl picked up screws, bolts, and a drill bit for his project in the basement. They met at the bookstore as planned, and after purchasing several hardcovers from the remainder bin, headed to Joyce's Diner holding hands like teenagers. Carl ordered a steak rare with steak fries and onion rings. The ever-sensible Grace ordered broiled salmon and a house salad with dressing on the side. They shared a carafe of wine, and the time melted away. The waitress cleared her throat and began to clear away the dishes. Well, I hope you folks enjoyed your dinner. Yes, everything was just fine. Great, can I offer you some dessert? Joyce has some fresh apple crisp in the back. Goes great with ice cream. Grace shook her head no. Carl looked at her. Are you sure, Grace? Apple crisp with ice cream. Doesn't that sound great? I'm sure your cardiologist would be delighted. The impatient waitress began tapping the eraser end of her pencil against her order pad. Tap, tap, tap. Well, that settles it. We'll have 2 apple crisps with vanilla ice cream and a pepperoni and sausage pizza to go. Carl! Oh, sorry, Grace. I forgot the vegetables. Throw some mushrooms and green peppers on that pizza. Yes, sir. Carl, what are you thinking? I'm not thinking. I'm feeling, and I feel great. But Carl, no buts about it. This day will be a fabulous memory when we are in our 90s and can't remember how to put in our teeth. Grace had to laugh. He was right. These rare moments are the tethers to grasp when the sinkholes of life threaten to swallow you whole. It was dusk when they headed home. The mountain road a slick washboard. Carl's night vision was limited. He gripped the steering wheel and leaned forward trying to get a better view. Grace checked her seatbelt buckle, pumped an imaginary brake, and white-knuckled the oh-shit bar until they parked. Carl turned off the ignition with a sigh of relief. Well, that was an adventure. I need a nap. Carl pulled the recliner lever to sit up. He yawned, stretched, and turned on the lamp. He shook Grace, who was snoring away on the couch. What? What is it? Come on, Grace, wake up. I don't want to wake up. Go away. Carl shook her again. Come on, get up. What in the blue blazes is wrong with you? Nothing's wrong. I have an idea. Grace groaned and rolled over. He jostled her again, persistent. Get up and get dressed. Dress warm. Dress warm? Get that cute little butt moving. We're going out. Out? Outside? Grace squinted at the grandfather clock. It's almost midnight. Are you crazy? He pulled her to her feet and squeezed her so hard she feared he'd pop a rib. Yep, crazy for you. And he planted a big sloppy kiss hard on her lips. Grace heard him put on his heavy winter gear and slam the door. She loved that man, but this was insane. She had no choice but to follow him. If she went back to sleep and he fell, he'd freeze to death in a few hours. She wasn't carrying that guilt to her grave. Carl, where the hell are you? In the shed. Come give me a hand. When she got close, he tossed something in her direction. Catch. Wax her up good. It's been a while. Wax? The toboggan? I'll tie on a new tow rope while you wax. Grace knew that tone. There would be no argument or discussion. His mind was set. He hummed while they worked, and she fumed. Carl handed her a portion of the tow rope. Okay, let's go. It's not okay. It's nuts. You're nuts. No, I'm in love. Together they dragged the toboggan to the top of the sledding hill. Their boots crunched through the thin ice glaze coating the snow. Carl rocked the wooden sled back and forth and back again. Yep, feels like there's enough wax. Carl boarded first, settling himself in the sled's curved front. Come on, honey, get on board. Grace stood there with her arms crossed and shook her head in reply. No, please, he pleaded. If we go too far, we'll end up in the trout pond and drown, or maybe we'll freeze to death first. Carl shook his head and muttered, my wife, always the optimist, trust me. In response, Grace sat on the flatbed behind Carl, wrapped her legs around his waist, her arms around his chest, and whispered, I love you. This is going to be great. And it was, all the way to the bottom of the slope where a 4-foot snow embankment prevented them from continuing into the trout pond. The anticipation of another run made the slow trek up the steep hill bearable. Their laughter rang sharply in the frozen stillness. Grace's face tingled beneath a dusting of wet, blown snow. She settled herself behind Carl, ready to go again. Maybe Carl's idea wasn't so crazy after all. I love you, Gracie. Thank you. And they pushed off. The toboggan's wooden slats groaned in protest. It turned sideways and flipped. Woohoo! Shouted Carl as they were tossed into a snowbank. Laughing, they rolled out of the snowbank and onto their backs. Carl scooted closer to Grace, his hand searching for hers. Hand in hand, they lay quietly, viewing the waning gibbous moon and stars, each feeling the reassuring warmth of the other through snow-caked woolen mittens. Does this remind you of anything, Grace? Don't go there, Carl. He rolled on top of her. That night was our first time together. Grace grabbed Carl behind the head and drew him close. She opened her mouth wide and tongued him. She ran her tongue along the top of his teeth and sucked his tongue hard before pulling hers out. Carl rolled off and onto his back. Guess you remember. What gave you a clue? He stood to assess the situation. We only made it halfway down, he said, offering her a hand up. How about one more run? They retrieved the toboggan, and Carl looked it over. Looks okay, let's go. Grace was exhausted and glad this climb up would be short. She could hear Carl breathing heavy with a bit of a wheeze. This would definitely be the last run. At the top, they boarded without comment. The snow was hard-packed by the previous runs, making it slicker. This run would be faster. 1, 2, 3, they counted. They flew past the point where they had flipped. The toboggan gained headway as it roared toward the pond. It fiercely collided with the snow embankment, forcing its curved nose to rise vertically like a whale breaching the ocean's surface. Crack! Rusted screws tore through the old wooden slats, and aged leather lashings snapped as it twisted in midair. Splintered wood shards soared before plummeting and piercing anything in their path. In the early morning, as the earth transitions from night to day, the temperature dips, the wind shifts, and the oppressive stillness of a winter night dissipates. The last thing we have to do, is there somebody from the library in here? You don't have to, we want to. We're making a small donation. The Brevard County Library System was founded in 1959 and has 17 branches in Brevard County. It's governed by a board of trustees who are appointed and funded by the Brevard County Board of Commissioners. They have 345 staff members who serve a population of over 550,000 residents. The Space Coast Writers Guild and Brevard Author Society would like to thank them for their community service by offering this small token of our appreciation. And Jean will close. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Apologize for the error. Okay, let's sit down. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for coming today. I'm so emotional today listening to the stories that were told. I said, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. I gotta go and learn how to write. Well, it's kind of difficult to write in 2 different languages, so I'm trying between 2 skedaddle. Oh, right here. Okay, I got some. Can't read it now. What happened, Jim? What did you do to them? There is no greater elevation in being a good writer. Tom Gold said that. The author of iconic books, The Right Stuff and The Bonfire of the Vanities. Glory is short-lived, but obscurity is forever. Napoleon Bonaparte. But my grandpa said, never drink and write on an empty stomach. Writing is a remarkable feat. Many famous writers realized that a short story is the foundation of a big story. Typical examples of a short story becoming a novel are the 2 Stephen King's books, Misery and Gerald's Game. To write short stories is an art in literature, an art of miniaturization, an art of cut and cut until you achieve the level of perfection for which you're awarded and recognized. We are fortunate that within our community of writers we have such extraordinary talent and amazing achievement of literary creativity, where the art of writing is becoming an art of painting. Painting stories with words depicted from life and imagination is hanging and showing on the walls of bookstores, tablets, Amazon, Ingram, Spark, Goodreads, and so on. No more to be read as tales, but viewed by the generation of new impatient readers as a moving picture. Show me, every reader says. So we oblige them, and today the awarded authors have shown the remarkable ability to create literary canvases that will hang on the walls of our websites, social media channels, YouTube channels, and in future publications. We, the volunteer organizer of this and other events, would like to encourage you to spread the idea of sharing with other people, to get involved, and to contribute your time and knowledge for the benefit of all those beginner writers, striving authors who need your help, who are struggling with the processes in formatting, manuscript preparation, submissions for publishing, self-publishing, and other associated know-how procedures that require expertise. So join us, become a volunteer, and enjoy the fruits of labor, for you are the foundation of the future generation of terrific writers. May your pen be mighty, and may you become famous and poor, but loved by everyone and be known around the world.